I'm going to show, before Khalil and I talk, I'm just going to show you a few photos. I'm really lucky that my family, my grandparents, as well as the Walker Company executives saved everything. And so I have this amazing collection of photographs and documents. So this is going to be like a 7 or 8 minute. I'm going to do it really quickly. All right, so this is should I use this microphone? Yeah, I'm good. So many people have seen that photo of Madam Walker. It's a very famous Addison Scurlock photo. I just like to start with this. I've written about Madam Walker's life and how she created a hair care company, became a philanthropist, employed thousands of women, and some people focus on the millionaire part. What I focus on is the fact that she provided jobs for thousands of black women, and she helped to create generational wealth, and she was a political activist. And my new book, Joy Goddess, about A'Lelia Walker, I just want to say there would be no Joy Goddess of Harlem had there not been a mother who had created a business that allowed her to be an heiress. And I sort of think of A'Lelia Walker as the first black celebrity heiress. We know that there were other black people who had money. Anybody who's watched The Gilded Age, has the fictional version of that. But everybody knew her. She was an influencer. Madam Walker's company was the Madam C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company. Her third husband was Charles Joseph Walker, hence Madam Walker. She wanted to make sure nobody disrespected her, so she added that title. But her wonderful hair grower and her vegetable shampoo were the products that made her a millionaire. She was born Sarah Breedlove in Delta, Louisiana, on the same plantation where her parents and older siblings had been enslaved in 1867. Orphaned at 7, widowed at 14, married at 14, she said, to get a home of her own, had her only child, A'Lelia, when she was 17, and then widowed at 20. And so she then moved up the river to St. Louis, where her older brothers had moved a decade earlier as part of the Exodusters migration, African Americans escaping political violence after the 1876 election. Once they were in St. Louis, her brothers were there, they were barbers, and the women of St. Paul AME Church, which was near the barbershop, embraced her, embraced Sarah Breedlove, began to give her a vision of herself as something other than an illiterate washerwoman. And she then, when her hair began to fall out, she developed this company. 1906 founded the company, but this is now 1912. Just a few years later, you can see mother and daughter with their chauffeur. I just like to show this because Madam Walker moved from Denver, traveled around with C.J. Walker developing the business, moved to Pittsburgh, opened Lelia College named after her daughter. Then she moved to Indianapolis in 1910, and her daughter Lelia was running the Pittsburgh office. And Harlem was part of her territory. And she persuaded her mother that they needed to have a presence in Harlem in 1913 as Harlem is becoming the mecca for black business and politics. So first she bought the building on the left, then she bought the building on the right, then they hired Vertner Tandy, the first licensed black architect in New York, to design this facade and to remodel with a beauty school, a beauty shop, and living quarters. This is the beauty salon, the beauty school downstairs. This is my grandmother, May, who's on the advertisement. May has very long braids. May was actually adopted by A'Lelia Walker, who was married 3 times but had no biological children. Sarah Breedlove and A'Lelia had known her uncle in St. Louis at St. Paul AME Church. When Madam Walker moved to Indianapolis, her biological grandmother lived across the street. She was a half orphan. Her father had died. Her mother is the 3rd generation of women in her family, raising 8 children and when she's under 30. So they agreed that she would be legally adopted. Madam Walker's main product was wonderful hair grower. May had very long hair. Just quickly through this, A'Lelia Walker, in trying to follow in her mother's footsteps with everybody's expectations, finding her own way and her own philanthropy during World War I. They were both very involved in supporting black soldiers. And where other people were knitting, knitting socks and buying cigarettes and shavers, A'Lelia Walker decided she would have a big fundraiser at Manhattan Casino to raise money for an ambulance. And this was, I think, her first foray as an impresario where she invited her friend Enrico Caruso to be the cameo celebrity, and they raised the money for the celebrity. Madam Walker was in Indianapolis but moved her personal residence to New York in 1916. She told her lawyer in a letter that that house, that beautiful townhouse, was too small for 2 women. And so she hired the same architect to build this house, Villa Lawara, which is still there. This is the music room. Madam Walker died in 1919. Alelia Walker becomes president of the company. Then in 1921, she sails to Paris in first class and stays on the Champs-Élysées, visits Cairo and Addis, where she meets the Empress, and London and Monte Carlo. She continues to be the sort of essentially figurehead of the company while the executive team in Indianapolis is really running things day to day. But this is a 1924 convention on the terrace at Villa Lawara in the front. Alelia Walker is very much a part of the Harlem Renaissance, and that's what we're going to talk about today, the parties that she gave, the people that she brought together. In 1927, she remodeled the 3rd floor of the townhouse on 136th Street, sent out this invitation for what became known as the Dark Tower. We dedicate this tower to the aesthetes, that cultural group of young Negro writers, sculptors, painters, music artists, composers, and their friends, a quiet place of particular charm. And because my grandparents saved everything, I also have the original menu. My favorite item on the menu, near the bottom on the left, is Alelia Walker iced tea. It was Prohibition, so I don't know. On either wall of the room, there were the poems by Langston Hughes, The Weary Blues on one wall, and Countee Cullen's From the Dark Tower, hence the name of the space, on the other wall. These are some of the books that were in my house when I was growing up. And then Alelia Walker was a muse for many photographers and artists. The picture on the left is by Bernice Abbott, and the picture, the pastel in the center, is by Richmond Barté, and the sculpture on the right is by Roy Shelton, not a name you would know. And I just like this because she's having fun with her friends at Villa Lawara. And here, I'm just going to leave that up because she's on a road trip. Okay? Thank you. Thank you, Eric.
So it's not a surprise that an accomplished award-winning TV producer would produce her own book talk. I am grateful because, as I said to Alelia, that there are so many wonderful images in the book. And I was thinking to myself, it's a shame not to be able to share with the audience just the kind of grand lives that these women lived, and that we are here to celebrate. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
And we're going to come back to some of this because I think some of the details of their lives are worth dwelling on a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. So let's start, in a sense, from the beginning. I mean, people here have a sense of Madam C.J. Walker, of Sarah Breedlove. You've just given us a kind of highlight. But I don't think, I mean, you didn't round the story, in my sense, to my hearing, in the way in which she imagines a future that is a sharp break from the past. And so talk a little bit more about how she comes to this realization that she can't actually keep doing what she's doing and guarantee a life for her daughter. It's a much more deliberate choice for her.
No, and absolutely, and yeah, you're right. I mean, I just wanted to, I knew you would have questions that would make me go more deeply into this. So just that the fact that she was born on this same plantation where her parents and older siblings had been enslaved, I mean, this was an area in Louisiana that had been the staging area for Grant's siege of Vicksburg. So it was devastated, and clear she had no real formal education, though she had seen a glimmer of something, because when she was a child, her family minister was elected to the state legislature in Louisiana. And the reason that her brothers left Louisiana is that after this 1876 election, not unlike recent elections when people try to steal elections, they literally were chased out by the Ku Klux Klan, and these people had started lining up on the banks of the Mississippi River because they were hoping that they were going to be able to get land in Kansas and Nebraska. And literally thousands of black people lined up because it was clear that sharecropping was not going to be lucrative for them. But her brothers ended up being in St. Louis, and they became barbers, which was at a time when black men dominated the barbering trade. But St. Louis had enough of a substantial black population, many people who had been free people of color. But Sarah Breedlove is this washerwoman, uneducated. But it is that grounding in the church, in the AME church, with the club women, women who were in part of a national organization. Those of you who know about the National Association of Colored Women, that was founded before the NAACP.
1896.
1896. And when black women wanted to be involved in suffrage and they were excluded from the white women's organization, those women met in her church in 1904. So Sarah Breedlove, the washerwoman, had a good enough voice to be in the choir, volunteered at the White Missionary Society, but she's still poor and aspiring. And it was one particular woman in the church, Jessie Batts Robinson, who was a school teacher, who really began to give her this vision of herself, that she could see that there was another way, to make sure her daughter was educated. And when her hair began to fall out, that was the avenue for her to find a way to make money. So she worked for a while for Annie Malone, who became her competitor, though the self-made thing is not accurate in any way.
And what version of it? Because what you haven't said to everyone who doesn't know this part of the story is that Annie Malone is the first to market wonderful hair grow as her secret to addressing this very issue.
Even that's not true.
I have a colleague, Tiffany Gill, who's a historian.
Yeah, but Tiffany is serious. Tiffany does really important work, beauty shop politics. But but it is. I mean, that's the name. But the title of the book is really grounded in great scholarship. What she did, were you all at Rutgers together? Okay, so she did her. I loved that people who were working on their dissertations. I met them when they were doing their dissertations. But she, through her research, really found that beauty. She called it beauty shop politics, but because politics was happening in the beauty shop, and among other things that. During the civil rights movement, when the churches became too much of a target with bombings, that people could meet in the beauty shops because these women owned their own places, and that the beauticians helped to pay for the buses that took people to the March on Washington in 1963. But there were actually,
we got controversy here.
Yeah, there's controversy.
I'm full of controversy.
Right. So wonderful, because I read all those old newspapers now that I can read them online. Wonderful Hair Grower was around before Annie Malone. It was just kind of a generic name like Kleenex. Okay. Cuticura was a product that had been around in the 1850s. And yes, Sarah Breedlove sold Annie Malone's products, and then she moved from St. Louis to Denver.
Okay, so that
part is true.
Aside from the controversy,
right.
That's the first step that she takes to break away from washerwoman, to imagine a different life for herself. She becomes a sales agent herself.
Right. Yes, that is true. That part is true. And that gets her, and so she then moves from St. Louis to Denver, and when she's in Denver, she's selling Malone's products, but she's also working as a cook for a man who owns the largest pharmacy west of the Mississippi River. And there's a person who knew them and who was interviewed in Stanley Nelson's film $2 in a Dream. And this woman, who was the daughter of a friend of Madam Walker, says that this pharmacist saw that she was selling this product, and he said, well, there's already these other things that are on the market, Cuticura and other things. This is a really old formula that the pharmacists know, it's been around for a long time. You can mix up your own formula, and you can put in it what you want and take out what you want. And so that was then when Charles Joseph Walker, her third husband, moved to Denver. They got married and they began to go into business for each other.
So one more aspect of this which sets up, I think, just an interesting question to think about. So Charles Johnson is in the newspaper business.
Mm-hmm.
So is it...
Charles Joseph Walker.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm thinking of
No.
National Relief. So her husband, her soon-to-be husband,
right.
Is in the newspaper business.
Right.
Is that fortuitous? or is it part of her secret plans? And she marries a guy who's selling advertising.
But right, I think that's why they hooked up. I think it was, the mentor, Jesse Batts Robinson's husband, had been the publisher of a newspaper in St. Louis, the St. Louis Clarion. And I don't know whether C.J. Walker worked for him, but C.J. Walker definitely was a newspaper ad salesman. And I think that was the connection, we're gonna do this thing together.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you that because, in the world that Booker T. Washington is helping to make, in a world that still inspires dreams of Black entrepreneurship and Black capitalism and Black empowerment, is her life exceptional or representative of something? You emphasize the importance of employing essentially these independent contractors. They are women who not only are able to sell the product, they can open their own salons and stock shelves with the product, they can work at the school as educators. It's an entire economic system, the hair system,
right,
as some have dubbed it, that is self-fulfilling. It is a virtuous cycle of opportunity for Black people. But is Madam C.J. Walker just first to see this in ways that is hard to replicate? That's what I'm curious how you make sense of what she's able to accomplish.
Well, when you think about it, Black women have been independent contractors for a really long time. Whether it's market women, we see that, but also, remember, washerwomen went on strike in Atlanta. It was a very famous strike. These are Black women were the washerwomen, and they went on strike. They knew that they were offering a service. So this idea of people, people who were able to buy their freedom. So this was not a new thing, African market women and all of that. But I think what Sarah Breedlove's genius was that she had watched those women, those club women, she watched those church women, the missionary society, and she had seen the structure that they had for creating kindergartens and retirement homes and doing other kind of civic work. And she had a kind of a resilience, and her brothers had been barbers, so she'd seen that. So all of those little pieces came together. She was, and this is sort of in contrast to Annie Malone, who I always say was a giant, and that's why that's what the Netflix series makes me want to throw up.
And I did not watch the Netflix series.
I'm so glad you did, because it portrayed, they were both really important women who did a lot of really important work. But Madam Walker just had more charisma, and she had a real knack for identifying talent. And I began to think over a period of time that hair care, selling the hair care products, it solved a need. Madam Walker did not invent the high comb. I do have to say that often so people.
Does everybody know what a high comb is? As I look out in this audience, maybe.
And if you don't, ask the person next to you. But the wonderful hair drawer. This is something that said, you have to explain, because I did have grandparents who did not have indoor plumbing. That was another part of my family. So all of you are not old enough to know this. But what people don't understand, that 90%, or not 90% of Black folks lived in the South, but most Americans didn't have indoor plumbing and electricity at the turn of the century. That meant people didn't bathe very often. They washed their hair even, less often, and so people had not just dandruff, but they had really bad scalp infections and scalp disease. And that's why Sarah Breedlove was losing her hair, and that's why she developed this product. But that was revolutionary at the time for her to put, and this may be some of the connection with C.J. Walker. She put her own image on the product. Now that's 1906. But very many people are saying Black women are beautiful, and she had the courage and the confidence to do that. But I did begin to think that over a period of time, as she's training all these women, traveling around the United States, the Caribbean, and Central America, that the hair care products became a means to an end. That she realized these women really wanted education and economic independence.
Yeah. So we're going to move to A'Lelia in just a moment, but I think the transition is important because the life that A'Lelia lives, or Lelia, and we can talk about the A, where the A comes from.
Right.
Lelia her story doesn't exist in the way that it happened without understanding the significance of the company. So you just sort of breeze by this diasporic business. I mean, this company becomes an international company. And Madam Walker takes nothing for granted. She sees herself as the company's best salesperson. Right? No matter how successful she gets, she never leaves the front line of the business, which is herself. Right. Which is she's an ambassador to the business. So it's in multiple countries in South America, in the Caribbean. They try to expand to Africa. Later on, there's even an attempt to think about Europe. Doesn't quite work out. But talk about the economics of the company. Put in context how much money this company is making. So I'll give you the first benchmark that I remember from the book. So there's a moment, maybe around 1908, you can correct me, the company is making about $1,000 a month. And you say in the text that that is compared to the typical white professional salary of $2,000 a year. So that grows exponentially. So just chart for us how significant the revenue stream is for this company. Because then it puts in context why the company is all over the place, why Madam C.J. Walker's commitment to being an ambassador and face of the company is so important, and why in the end A'Lelia can live the life that she lives.
Right. Well, and I mean, it is this $1,000 a month was when white men who were managers were making $2,000 a year or somewhere in that neighborhood. That meant that they could go anywhere and do anything they wanted within the Jim Crow context. But it meant that she could hire people, that she could build a factory, that she could travel, that she was able to develop this workforce. And that the model was, it wasn't a pyramid thing, it wasn't that way, but what she would do is travel from one town to the next, and she would take out an ad in the newspaper and say, Madam C.J. Walker's coming and she's going to be at this church, and she would give a lecture to a large group of people. This is, before TV and movie houses in most places. And she had a kind of an early version of PowerPoint, something called a stereopticon, glass slides that would project. And she would show pictures of Booker T. Washington's Tuskegee Institute. She'd show pictures of North Carolina Mutual Insurance, other black pharmacies and black businesses and black schools. So she would get the crowd excited, and then she would meet with a smaller group of maybe 10 to 12 women who she was recruiting as agents. And she would identify, who is asking the best questions, who do other people gravitate towards, who has charisma, and she'd make that person her lead agent. Those women were just as hungry as she was to try to make some money. And so those women, when they would come to her conventions, those were the women who were leading things. So it was identifying leadership and then turning it into an army of sales agents who were inspiring others. I'll just add this too. I was in Dallas a few months ago, and I met a woman who's like second generation owning a beauty salon and beauty supply. Her mother, she told me her mother was working in picking cotton in Louisiana. And one woman in town who wasn't picking cotton had a beauty salon and had gone to a Walker Beauty School. And her mother said, that's what I want to do. And her mother moved to Dallas, and she went to the Walker Beauty School, and now all five of her children went to college. They own their business. They're all entrepreneurs. But it was that kind of spirit, I think, that is what caught fire for people, and that allowed her to build a business that became so successful.
Okay, so just one note in terms of money. Well, I'll give two, just to close the loop on this. So you say in 1916, sales of the company in today's dollars, in today's dollars for then were $5.7 million, right? And that only 10 Americans at the time, this is 1916, had wealth over $5 million. Wow. So when we sort of talk about her as the first black millionaire, we don't really put in context that she was past $1 million.
Right.
And relative to wealth at the time, with the exception of the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts, etc., she is in rarefied air. She is on the Forbes 400, which you actually make reference to.
Yeah, and and it's not 5 million. What's 5 million was 250,000 then, 5 million, which would translate to 5 million. Today, 5 million doesn't sound like that much when we know that they're billionaires and trillionaires. And John D. Rockefeller was a billionaire, but when most people did not have anything near that, this was huge.
Oh yeah, well that's why I said only 10 Americans had wealth over 5 million. Now, one last note on the money. So this is getting ahead of us, but just to put that in context. So when May gets married, how much money is spent on this wedding?
$40,000 in 1924 money. Too much.
And how much does that translate into today?
I can't remember. Do you have the,
I do.
the note? Okay.
$750,000.
It was too much.
Lily was messing with your money at that point.
Yes, right. That's right. And you're right. So 4 generations of women in my family worked at the Walker Company. My mother was a vice president of the Walker Company when I was growing up, but I did not have a trust fund.
And actually, there was controversy about this, both internal and external. So we'll segue now to Alelia, her story, but maybe we'll start with this controversy. So there's a character in this story who I just fell in love with. F.B. Ransom.
Oh yes.
And I just love how important he is for you in telling the story of Alelia and also the relationship between mother and daughter. So just to piggyback on this $750,000 wedding, Ransom, as Alelia is about to describe, is the COO of the company. He basically runs the company, and this is after years of Alelia's extravagant spending. And this is just like, he just is besides himself. But there was news, the cost and extravagance of the wedding becomes newsworthy that people are speculating that it was $1 million wedding.
Right.
In fact, it was just $750,000.
Right.
So let's go back to her beginning. So there's a moment when Alelia is basically raised in the company. She doesn't know anything other than her very earliest days of her mother not being the head of this powerful company. So her entire coming of age story is working for Walker Manufacturing.
Right.
And F.B. Ransom becomes kind of a surrogate father figure in her life because he's got to manage not only her as an employee, but also her relationship with her mom, which at some point, I don't know if it's him or someone else that dubs them Fire and Ice.
No, it's the secretary, but yes. But
so let's talk about.
She was his right-hand person. So when they are in St. Louis, and until Madam Walker is 38 is when she is no longer a washerwoman. So Alelia is growing up poor in St. Louis, but they're part of this church, so they're getting the nurturing that goes along with that. But it's really when Alelia is 20 that Madam Walker is developing the business, and she's, at that point in 1906, there's not a lot of career options for her, so she's doing what her mother tells her to do. Her mother sent her to Knoxville College for a semester. She comes back. She was sort of trying to run the Denver office, then the Pittsburgh office. So she's taking direction from her mother, but it's not like she has some other career path option. And this is the best thing, and it gives you all of the wonderful things that go along with having a mother who has a lot of money and who has a business. And she actually does have some great marketing ideas, but she's not as focused as her mother. Her mother's the founder of the business, and this is often what happens. She's trying to struggle to find her own way. But she, when Madam Walker then hires F.B. Ransom, F.B. Ransom is an attorney. Those of you who spend time on the Vineyard, I know there's some Vineyard folks who are here. Stanley Nelson and Jill Nelson are the grandchildren of F.B. Ransom, who was Madam Walker's. He was considered the general manager, but now he's the general counsel, the CFO, the CTO, the COO, all of those things. So he's
awesome.
He is awesome.
The women in the story are awesome, but
we needed an awesome man.
Yes,
Yes, he is. And so Madam Walker hires him as a young, he's just finished studying law. He had been a Pullman porter. She met him on the road, and she persuades him to come to Indianapolis. And first he's doing a little legal work for her, then he comes in-house. And he's does the intellectual property stuff. He's making sure that Madam Walker can be the visionary, that she can travel, because he's making sure the manufacturing is happening, that the orders are getting out on time, that whoever's threatening her about whatever, that he keeps that at bay. And when Madam Walker dies, now Amelia Walker is named the president of the company, but she's in Harlem. And she's managing the New York office, but she's not looking at the ledgers like her mother. Ransom is doing that, and he's the hero. I really have to say this. I did a talk for the New York State Bar Association, and I was focusing on him because he was so integral to what was going on. And I had these, many pictures of him at the, various conventions, and I kept noticing he always had his briefcase. Because you don't know what was in that briefcase. It was the checks, it was the cash, it was the contracts. But he was the glue that held things together.
Now, I'm going to clean this up a little bit, because I know in the room, I'm looking at this audience, why are they talking about the guy? Why did he bring the guy? This is a book also with a bunch of trifling
yes, it is.
brothers.
Yes, it is. It is true. It is very true. Seriously. True.
And to be honest with you, reading the book, I was like waiting for Ransom to betray them.
Oh, wow.
And not because I just have a
No.
black man thing going, but like
That's
there's so many
trifling
hustlers
people.
and trifling people, and of course this kind of money attracts all the deadly sins, right?
Right.
so
Listen,
Ransom stayed true to the end, just makes him all the more remarkable.
Yes, Mr. Ransom, thank goodness. There was, he really, Mr. Ray, it's really important for me to include him. And in fact, when Jill read the book, I said, Jill, I just want to.
This is Stanley Nelson.
Yes.
Sister Jill Nelson,
right.
Journalist.
And I said, I wanted to give Mr. Ransom his due because he made such a difference. But the trifling people. So let's talk about that.
All right, so let's
talk about that.
So
they give some drama.
Well, first of all, a lot of marriages in this book.
Yeah.
Right? Like just working through the genealogy of the marriage. So you already mentioned that Madam C.J. Walker had 3 husbands. Mm-hmm. Turns out Amelia the same. Mm-hmm. But let's put her squarely in the moment where she starts to become her own person. And of course, part of that is she has a very early failed marriage, almost not even worth mentioning.
Right.
Mr. Robinson, it's John Robinson,
right?
Yeah. Right. But her second marriage is way more interesting. I mean, we spent a lot of time because it animates so much of her life. Mm-hmm. And so maybe just situate her personality, how you understand her sense of well-being as an heiress. I mean, some of the ways in which Amelia captures it's your great-grandmother, great-great-grandmother. One great-grandmother. I mean, obviously with great care, sympathy, you're also pushing back against the kind of one-dimensional caricatures that show up in other historical treatments of the Harlem Renaissance, where she's an integral figure, there's no question. She's probably, I guess this wouldn't be a stretch to say, the single most important black arts patron of the Harlem Renaissance as an individual.
Who had some money? I mean, Elaine Locke and Charles Johnson.
I mean a patron in a
patron. Right, yeah. But
not as someone broke.
And who was black, right.
So, people know about Charlotte Mason Good, who was Langston Hughes' famous white benefactor. But Amelia Walker is holding her own in supporting, as is her mother for the time. She's dead by 1919, so she doesn't really experience the Renaissance. So help us appreciate how she's navigating who she's becoming, her wealth, her relationship to this community. She loves high society.
Right.
Well,
you see her here. She was very tall, and she was 5'9". Sometimes, you'll see a description that she was 6 feet. She wasn't really 6 feet, but she was very tall. She was very charismatic. That one scholar later said she didn't just walk into a room; she swept into a room. I'm trying to think of somebody. There years ago when I was. Well, Michelle Obama, yeah, and yes, Michelle Obama, but without the law degree. So there's, but I'm thinking of like someone physically. I used to think that Queen Latifah would kind of personify her stature. And there are other people. Verda May Grosvenor. I mean, most of you will not know. Verda May was a very well-known culinary arts person, but Verda May had that kind of build. Wunmi Wasaka, who was in Sinners. That's the kind of,
Annie, the conjugal woman.
Yeah, that's who I want to play Amelia Walker. I'm putting it out there.
It's great, like postscript.
Yeah.
Where everyone ends up.
It's
very cinematic.
Right.
Yes.
But she filled a room when she walked in, and she was Madam Walker's daughter, which meant everywhere she went, people knew who she was. And sometimes people wanted something from her, but they also imposed upon her their expectations for what she should be, and of course she could not be that person. And yet she's trying, she's got such a big personality, she's trying to hold her own. So to put the relationships with men is a key part of this story, because her childhood is kind of filled with a lot of instability. And so I kind of give her grace for that, though she does make some bad decisions that you just want to, like, knock her on the head. But yeah, the first husband was somebody who was an aspiring musician. She and her mother both loved music, and so musicians were around them, but her mother was like, this guy is not really, he might be aspiring, but it's not going to happen. And she marries, she elopes and marries him, and it doesn't work out, just as her mother said.
You have to set up the second.
Okay, so the second, so
there's
now.
drama here.
So there's drama.
It's
So
two
here's
suitors, right?
There are two suitors.
You can almost think of this as like a kind of royal princess opportunity. Like
It is.
Who gets this treasured bride?
So, but I have to do this for anybody who saw Self-Made, and I'm glad you didn't.
I saw it, it just didn't see it.
Oh, good, yeah, good. But they made up a girlfriend for her that didn't exist. And so that was the Hollywood, that was what the showrunners and the head writer wanted to do. And I kept saying to them, well, the more interesting story is the real story. And here's the real story. Amelia Walker had two boyfriends, both doctors, both handsome. One was a good guy, one was a bad boy. Her mother liked, thank you. It amazes me that sometimes people say the bad boy, and I'm like, really, Mama? No. Mama, might have liked the bad boy, but no. But yeah, so Dr. Wiley Wilson was the bad boy, was, arrogant and
Went to Howard
Medical School and pharmacy.
No, I just mean that that just enhances his appeal. Attractive, Howard educated,
Right, yeah.
medical degree. Yes.
And then,
Like the Billy D. Williams of it.
right, exactly. And Dr. James Arthur Kennedy went to Meharry, and he also was a pharmacist and a doctor. And Madam Walker was, she liked the good guy, the upstanding guy, and he, at this moment when it looks like Amelia is leaning towards Wiley Wilson, Madam is not very happy about it, but she's trying not to interfere. And she...
And on her deathbed.
So this is, I guess this is key for this. If they've come to loggerheads on this, and so in order
The choice. This is like an ongoing thing.
Right.
Which one am I going to marry?
Right.
So it's like Bridgerton.
It is. This is why it's really going to be a great movie. So they are at such odds about this that essentially Amelia goes off with my grandmother May to South America. My grandmother May at this point is at Spelman. She takes her out of school. They go to South America. They're going away for several months so that Amelia can develop business overseas, but it's really to get her away from Dr. Wiley Wilson. And Amelia knows this, and she knows who her mother likes, and she writes a letter to her mother from South America saying, I have decided to marry Kennedy and not Wiley Wilson. And the last letter that her mother writes to her is, "My dear baby, I am so glad Edna has read me the news that you have decided to marry Kennedy. I always thought he would make you happy." And essentially, I didn't want to say it, but I didn't think Wiley would. And then
she passes. And how long? How many weeks?
so like a week or so later.
Right.
But she has invited, with this receipt of the letter, she has invited Kennedy from Chicago to come to her deathbed so she can bless this marriage.
And then how much longer after that does she marry Wiley?
Like a week or two later.
So,
thank you. You're just like, you got to read the book now. And he is the dog that he.
So I'm going to read you a part because this raises a really interesting question about, and I'm going to let you read it actually.
He was, but as my grandfather knew them both. My grandfather grew up in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. His father was valedictorian. His father, is that right? His father was valedictorian of his class at Lincoln in 1883, and he had known Wiley's brothers. They were also in Pine Bluff, and my grandfather said that Wiley's brother John, as he said, finagled him into marrying Lelia for her money.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask Lily to read this passage because it is about a woman named Inez Richardson. Now, the point of this to describe how trifling Wiley is. So Wiley basically.
Oh, this is going to be hard to read.
Wiley basically, I mean, he marries her for her money. This is not a surprise, right? Very old story, but marries her for her money, and doesn't even have the decency to be a kind of faithful husband for
even a facade.
Right, even a facade. I mean, this guy latches on to this woman named Inez very quickly and is courting her. The first description you had is of Alelia's out of the apartment, and he's hosting some people over. And if I have this correctly, this woman named Inez, this hussy, is sitting down, sitting down between his legs,
right.
in front of everybody. I mean, it is. I mean, so when
I know this from the divorce papers.
Yeah. So he ultimately buys a building so he can open a medical practice.
138th and 7th on Stravers Road. No mean little building.
Right. With her money, is flagrantly having an affair. When she, many years later, tries to sue him, he countersues that she had asked him to marry her and had, in a kind of a dowry, had basically said, in order, I will sweeten the deal if you marry me and buy this building for you. I mean, the man just made all this up. But I want you to read this passage because it says a little something about how you understand how Alelia is feeling in relationship to this woman that won't go away. I mean, she has to live in the shadow of this woman for a very long time.
Right.
So it's the lined paragraph to the left.
Oh, this is painful. By June 6th, Lelia's 35th birthday and the first anniversary of her marriage to Wiley, she was a wreck, pitted against someone who triggered her deepest insecurities. Inez was everything Lelia could never be, an ingenue, while Lelia was a divorcee failing at a second marriage. Inez was slim and spirited. Lelia was statuesque and flamboyant, with rich, deep brown skin in a world that placed less value on her African beauty than Inez's latte complexion. Inez had not gone after Wiley, but neither had she discouraged him. Lelia had pursued Wiley, and he exploited her overtures. Inez was not entirely innocent, but gullible and flattered enough by an older man's attention that she didn't seem to fully grasp the stakes. Lelia, though, knew exactly what Wiley was up to.
So why do you think she put up with this for so long?
I mean, low self-esteem. I mean, I just think she just didn't feel worthy. And he was the bad boy who kind of excited her. Yeah, there's an interesting postscript to this,
All right,
to
all right.
Wiley, to Inez and Wiley. So Inez was the stepdaughter of John Green, who was a black state legislator in Ohio. Her mother's family had gone to Oberlin. She was a school teacher, very pretty, and an aspiring actress, and actually was in one of the plays that won a Pulitzer or something at some point. But years later, like a decade ago, as I was struggling to finish this book, which took me 1,000 years to write, I had written a couple of blog articles just because I needed to give myself some encouragement that I could write. And I had a blog article where I wrote about Wiley and his brother John. John owned a hotel in New York called the Olga, which was a very famous black hotel, partially bought with William's money too. But I got a call or an email from someone who said, I'm John Wilson's son. So we had a conversation, and he was telling me, this was how John was also, John was, also out there. All this Epstein stuff is going on. There's a lot of stuff to think about, how women were exploited. But this person is the son of a young woman who was working as a housekeeper in the hotel. And she got pregnant. But John's reputation was so crazy that all the other girlfriends helped raise him. Now, and he's a successful real estate guy, and this was just part of the story. But as we're talking, I said, whatever happened to Inez and Wiley's daughter, Joyce? She must be dead now. He said, oh no, Joyce is living in Reno. So Joyce and I developed a relationship. And we actually we talked one time, but she was living in Reno in her 80s at that point, and worried about the minutes on her phone plan, so she didn't want to talk on the phone. But she wrote me the most detailed emails about all these people during the 20s who she remembered. She was even Roy Cohn's classmate, and she said he was a horrible person then. But she had a great memory, and she had been a photographer, professional photographer. She took pictures for the Village Voice. She was the first black photo editor for Time Life, I think. But yeah, I mean, Wiley and Inez were only married for a short period of time.
Yeah. All right, so we're gonna, now that we've moved through that, she does end up marrying Kennedy later in life.
Yes, she does.
And they don't have a great marriage.
No, because at this point, he's number 2 at the Tuskegee Veterans Hospital. She's in Harlem. She visits Tuskegee a few times, but she likes bridge, but it's not, playing bridge in Tuskegee versus going to the whatever in Harlem. It's not quite the same thing.
Yeah. So they have a long distance relationship that eventually dissolves. Okay, so let's talk about Alelia's genius.
I am loving talking to you.
So she actually has her own business talents. I mean, so she's not, just the kind of prodigal child who's spendthrift. She is in some ways to be credited with the move to New York in and of itself. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that, the decision she makes and the success that comes with it.
So it's also important to just think about how much Madam Walker, what a control person she was, because she started this business. I mean, the founders always want to have control, and we see that playing out. And so you can't ever entirely live up to the expectations, and especially if it's your parent, it's a hard thing to do. But when she's running this Pittsburgh office, you could see those 2 townhouses, and she's the one who said we need to be in Harlem. Now, she wanted to be in Harlem because Harlem was interesting, but it also made good business sense.
But they also get there before Harlem becomes almost a decade.
Right.
Yeah.
And she sees what's getting ready to happen, and I think that because they're in New York, that is another reason why they're more well known than their other contemporaries. Because anytime somebody is, some journalist is coming and writing about Negroes in New York, they're like the people you want to go see. They're the richest ones, and you want to write about what they're doing. They have this beautiful beauty salon, and they're both entertaining in this home. The famous musicians and artists and writers are already coming there. They know all of the political people. So she is really the one who creates the space in New York and the media capital of the world.
Yeah, and just to paint a picture, so 135th Street and Lenox Avenue is an intersection that is home to Harlem Hospital, which had been built and it had become a black hospital in the early 20th century, but it had been around since the late 19th century. And, the who's who of people born there or who used that hospital is a very long list. Around the corner from that was the Black YMCA, St. Philip's Episcopal Church, and of course the Schomburg Library, which opens as a black library by 1925 when the Arturo Schomburg collection comes. So their townhouse is one block up on 136th Street, just off of Lenox Avenue.
Right, and really right behind the original Schomburg building. They almost backed up.
Which is called the County Cullen Library today, still there. So her push to establish essentially a front office in New York City was really genius.
Right, it was.
You know, it was. You could say at the time she does it, it's fairly speculative. It's not clear. This is not the Harlem where black people have already gained the kind of cultural and political power that they will one day come into their own with. So what does she make of it? I mean, how does she establish herself amongst a growing group of peers who we now know as legendary?
Mm-hmm. Well, she and her mother had actually visited New York a couple of times when the black community was centered on 53rd Street.
Yep. Close to where the Lincoln Center is today.
That was torn down. I'm just trying to think of the name of the hotel. It was the...
Where they stayed before they...
Yeah, but it was a famous black hotel, and I just can't think of the name of it. You know what it is, but we can't think of it at the moment. But they did their demonstration selling their products at the colored YWCA. And then Harlem began to move north as St. Philip's opened the church and the apartment building. And Lelia could see this. When she was trying to persuade her mother to move to New York after she had already built this townhouse and designed it, which meant Mr. Ransom said they spent too much money on it, but Madam Walker backed her daughter up and said no. And it was. And
you went through that slide really quickly, but it was sort of. I mean, you describe it as there we go. You describe this as posh and as opulent and as luxurious as anything on Fifth Avenue in
Absolutely.
In terms of where people would come to visit the salon.
I mean, and at a time, this is like, black folks are not having these kinds of luxurious places, and so everybody wanted to be there. And she, as she said, I want the best of everything. She had been spoiled by her mother. They got mad at each other. Madam would buy her a
Cadillac,
right? But she said, I don't like cheap stuff. She had acquired the taste for expensive things, and she wanted this to be a place. But what she did when she was trying to persuade her mother to come, they already knew lots of important political figures and other black entrepreneurs and publishers, but she hosted a dinner party for her mother. That's the opening chapter of the book, in the townhouse. And at that point, it's just one of the townhouses. But it's 3 newspaper publishers, James Reese Europe, who is the musician of the day. He's I don't know, like the Quincy Jones of his day, in some ways. Impresario, who had a union for the black musicians. They were the favored musicians in the mansions on Park Avenue and Fifth Avenue because they played the most beautiful music. And so those were the people who were at the dinner party. She wanted to impress her mother and give her mother these connections that would help attract her to the city. But everybody knew them and wanted to be there. Madam Walker had become such a huge figure.
She was a curiosity too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She was involved in the anti-lynching movement, and a big entrepreneur. So people wanted to hear what she had to think, and she wanted to hear what other people had to think.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the politics that they are involved in and the culture to round out our conversation as we move towards a Q&A to invite you all in. So we'll do the politics first, and then we'll wrap up with the culture.
Mm-hmm.
So Villa Lewaro, you can tell them what the Lewaro stands for. So the villa was because the grounds, it was the architecture and the ground that sort of reminded folks of an Italian village. Mm-hmm. And the Lewaro is?
So the Lewaro comes from Enrico Caruso, And this story, when Amelia Walker decided to host this big event at Manhattan Casino, and Caruso was supposed to be the
fundraiser
fundraiser
during World War I.
Right, for the ambulance. So at the last minute, he sent a telegram and he couldn't come because he performed, his voice was strained and he couldn't come. They still raised the money for the ambulance, but a week or so later, he visited the house. It was under construction. And he said it reminded him of homes in Italy, so he said, look, we'll call it, you should call it Villa. And then he said, Villa Lewaro, using letters from Lelia Walker Robinson, L-E-W-A-R-O. So even though Mr. Robinson was long gone, his name is immortalized.
Because her name at that point was still Lelia Robinson. Yeah. So, because Madam Walker started to become the national figure as a successful businesswoman through, in part, exposure to Booker T. Washington's National Negro Business League meetings, whose annual conferences that began in like 1901, or 1900, 1901. She elbows her way into the stage, she gives a famous speech.
Right.
Eventually Booker T. Washington is like, she's a force to be reckoned with. She gives the school a bunch of money to begin to establish a presence on that campus, which helps to give her legitimacy across other black colleges, universities. This is Madam's story, not
right.
Lilia's. But it matters because by the time they build the villa, Madam C.J. Walker has such a reputation that she's able, the sort of coming out party is a really big deal. Mm-hmm. And so just to establish that as the site for her sort of political and national influence, maybe set the scene for Emmett Scott, his invitation and what the scene looks like.
So Madam Walker moves into the house in May of 1918, and in August she hosts the opening party, and Emmett Scott, who had been Booker T. Washington, they say, he's described as secretary, but really chief of staff at Tuskegee, and now he is the
Assistant Secretary
for Negro Affairs, the War Department, the highest ranking black man in federal government. And Madam Walker wants to have a big splash, and so she invites him to be the guest of honor. And it's, a who's who of white abolitionist descendants and black business people and black college presidents and all kind, a wide range of very famous black people. And Alelia helps her plan the party, but Emmett Scott is, he's working for Woodrow Wilson's administration. And so he wants it to be buttoned up, and Madam Walker has on the invitation, conference of interest to the race, which kind of freaks him out because he's not sure what the Wilson folks are going to think. But she has done this in a way, just as she elbowed her way into that convention with Booker T. Washington in 1912. Emmett Scott has been planning these committees of 100 with black men, journalists, and they're all involved in the war effort. Well, the women are involved in the war effort, and Madam was like, well, wait a minute, where are we going? Why aren't we part of this? And it was essentially, well, your time will come. And she's like, well, I'm just going to have the party, and I'm going to have him here, and I'm going to make my time.
That's right. Yeah, so a couple things here just on the politics, and this is a common theme for both Madam until she passes and then Alelia. So you've got lynchings happening in the United States. There's a series of anti-black riots that occur in 1919. Black GIs have experienced a number of attacks. They defend themselves in Brownsville, Texas in 1906, and many are dishonorably discharged as they try to defend themselves against white supremacists. I mean, in other words, painting a picture that under the Woodrow Wilson administration, black people have been purged from the federal government, segregation returns to D.C. Wilson himself is signing off on the reemergence of the Klan, which occurs during his first administration in 1915. So he's got a black guy whose job it is to pretend like none of this is happening.
Exactly, to tamp it down, like this is not the time to talk about lynching.
Yeah, and
even though there are 300,000 black people in Europe fighting.
Correct, and fighting under, they're fighting under the American flag, but they are deployed to the battlefield under the French flag because the U.S. Army would not use them as combat soldiers. They win the highest ranking medal, My wife and I took our kids to Paris many, many years ago when the kids were younger, and really for the first time, I saw in the military museum in Paris an entire history of black soldiers in World War I that you'd be hard-pressed to find anywhere in a museum here, save for the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is just 10 years old. But I wanted us to sit with this for a moment because it's such an important milestone for what this place meant for that family, that it was not just a place of high society and the black elite and extravagant weddings and receptions, but that it had been rooted in not just a notion that we have the right to describe and to define what is happening to us and to hold people's feet to the fire, which is essentially what they were hoping would come of this, but that black women would also have the power to compel black men to do better for the race. Mm-hmm. That's a big part of what's playing out in this context between these two women, the mother and the daughter.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That this house, Madam Walker said, people criticize her, like, why are you being so extravagant? It's, you're building this house in this wealthy community. And she said, no, I'm doing this for black boys and girls because I want to show them their possibilities. And she wanted it to be a place where people convene. When the soldiers came back from France, she opened up the house for a week for them to just, like an open house for them to come through. It was always about having a place that was symbolic for black people. And it still has that mystique. I mean, it's still there. It's not a house museum. It's not open to the public. The current owner, Richelieu Dennis, owns Essence and owns Sundial Brands, but he just had an event, a Black Women in Business, an Essence Black Women in Business event luncheon with about 50 people, and it was Ursula Burns from Xerox, Patti LaBelle was there, and 4 other people, and all of these people who've seen everything were just still mesmerized by being in that house. So it still has a magic and a mystique, and it is what both women represented.